dressed like a slut at dinner with his family. He told me he knew my intentions and embarrassed me. It's funny how we only wake up to our mistakes when faced with the consequences of our actions. It happened to me. The electrifying urges and the feeling of wanting to impress and explore more moments with someone I'm not supposed to are things I would never forgive myself for. I broke my marriage for something I blindly labeled as destiny, and now I'm paying the price for it. For privacy's sake, I'll go with the name Mara, and will address my husband as Fred. We've been married for 5 years, but I threw all that away in a blink. I met my husband shortly after my breakup with my 3-year relationship boyfriend, Dan. I can't call it a breakup because actually I was dumped. I loved him just so much that I was blinded to the fact that I didn't mean that much to him the way he meant to me. I caught him cheating with my best friend, Rhea, a friend I considered my sister, and we shared almost everything together, from clothes, friends, family, money, and secrets. I didn't know that sharing boyfriends would one day be a part of it too. I considered her as my other half only for her to backstab me and have me kicked out in the worst way possible. Dan told me he no longer loved me, and Rhea was his soulmate. I almost died from the hurt and pain of betrayal. As if that wasn't enough, Rhea stole all my savings and left the country with Dan to get married and start their future together. I cursed and cried, but nothing changed. I decided to close that chapter of my life and move on. Trust and friendship were words I never wanted to be a part of me ever again, but my husband, Fred, changed that for me. He was like a pillar I needed to build my life all over again. I can't believe how easy it was for me to crush the happiness of someone like that. I met my husband Fred 2 years after my ugly experience with Dan. I had gone to a supermarket to buy my groceries, and I had gotten into an argument with one of the customers. I was the one next in line to make payments, and the guy popped out from behind, trying to cut the line. When I tried to talk back, he told me his girlfriend's legs were hurting and he couldn't wait behind anymore. Hearing the word girlfriend from his mouth and seeing her act so coy and sweet made my skin crawl, fueling me with rage that I exploded at them. I was furious and lashed out at them, screaming at the top of my voice. I lectured him about treating people fairly and being patient, telling him that this would be one of the best ways to strengthen their relationship. That's when I noticed Fred behind me. He had burst into laughter at my words. The angry customer had tried to hit me out of retaliation, but Fred stepped in, defending me, and having the guy kicked out of the supermarket with his girlfriend. We talked briefly after that, and that was how we started meeting more often. Fred made me feel like myself after a long time of not knowing who I was. He was very caring, observant, and a very supportive person. I fell in love with him because of his transparent and honest personality, and he was a good advisor too, one I found comfort in. I guess that's why I married him. He was real. He helped me get back on my feet and made me see a future I thought I'd never get a taste of. We had a son the same year we got married, and we had been living a happy and peaceful married life until the sun decided to set on me. One morning, Fred told me his brother was returning to the country after a while, and we were going to be having a family dinner at his family home. Fred was excited the whole day and even took a day off from his work to join his family in welcoming his brother back home. I was so curious to meet this special brother, Fred, and his family had been bragging about only to see Dan walk in through the door that evening. Everyone had a big smile on their face with their eyes dripping with tears of joy as they hugged and welcomed him back home, and all I could do was freeze to the spot I was sitting because I was too shocked to know that my ex, Dan, was my husband's brother. The one they had been anticipating. I couldn't believe the turn of things. I couldn't move or say anything as all our past memories came flooding back like it all happened yesterday. It wasn't until my husband walked over calling for me that I was able to regain a piece of myself. He must have noticed my pale expression, and that's why he asked if I was okay. I told him I was fine and everything was okay. He held me up to my feet, and he brought me closer to Dan, and he introduced me to Dan as his wife. I could see the flicker of shock on Dan's face when we both came face to face, but just like me, we had both hidden our emotions well, pretending to be strangers to each other. That was actually the right thing to do. We were strangers anyway, as that part of us had long been dead, and it should have stayed that way. But then I let my emotions get the best of me, leading to the dump I'm in right now. The family dinner was fun for Fred's family, but it was really awkward for me. It was so suffocating I had no idea what to do anymore. My heart was thumping so hard each time my eyes met with Dan's warm gaze. I'd immediately look away, pretending not to see him watching, and act like I wasn't affected by his presence anymore. But I was lying to myself. I wasn't okay. I can't explain the way I felt at that moment, but as much as I didn't feel good about seeing him again, I didn't feel bad either. After our family dinner that night, my husband bid farewell to his family, and he told Dan to feel welcome to visit our home anytime. I can't believe that loser took it so personally and appeared at our doorstep in the early hours of the next morning. My husband was a morning person because of his work, so he had already left, and I was busy getting our son ready for school when I heard the doorbell ring. I had rushed over thinking my husband had left something important and had sent someone over to get it as usual, only to meet Dan downstairs. The smile on my face vanished, and my expression blanked the second I saw it was Dan. I should have shut the door in his face the second I saw him, but I don't know what stopped me. I have no idea why I hesitated and couldn't say or do anything but stare at him. Dan made his way in, dragging me inside and shutting the door behind him. He started spewing gibberish, saying that I was still in love with him and it was obvious I still missed him. That jerk literally accused me of still being hung up on him, and that I had to marry someone who looked similar to him just so I could feel he was with me. He even went on asking if I was so obsessed over him that I had to dig up things about him, paving my way and reappearing in his life again as his brother's wife. I was so furious and disgusted that I didn't know when I slapped him. He responded to my slap with a kiss, and that's when I realized just how stupid I was. Instead of pushing him away and giving him a warning worth 5 years of my marriage, I suddenly felt weak and helpless under his touch that I couldn't do anything. That was the first step to my end. Would things have changed if I had not let my emotions control me? I'd like to think that way. After kissing me, Dan whispered in my ear that he was certain I had not gotten over him and that our kiss had just proven it. I pushed him away, strongly denying his words, and told him never to make such moves on me ever again. I thought that was it. I convinced myself it was just a mistake and there was nothing more to it. As if convincing ourselves always brought solutions and put a lid over our denials, I caught myself thinking of Dan the whole day. The kiss we had just shared kept replaying in my head over and over again. I kept beating myself for not pushing him and not giving him a piece of my mind, especially after all that he had put me through in the past. But all of that was pointless. I was just stupid to realize I was only letting myself slowly fall deeper into the trap of betrayal. Each time Dan came to mind, I'd tell myself that I was only angry at him. And that's why I was feeling that way, and he meant nothing to me. I had a husband now, and I was never going to hurt him. Just then, Dan returned, and he told me he wanted us to talk over coffee. I agreed and headed out with him. On our way to the cafe, I had advised myself that I was going to make things clear with him, and I was going to put everything in its place, but then I did the opposite. After our order was served, I was going to say all the words I had prepared in my head, but Dan beat me to it. He asked if I was okay and how I had been doing during the years he wasn't there beside me. I felt the pain all over again, and I began to tear up while cursing at him and blaming him for everything I had to go through because of him. I had barely finished ranting when Dan rose from his seat over to my side and pulled me into a hug. I tried to push him away from me, but my arms weakened the second I heard his soft voice utter the words, "I'm sorry." It was as if my world stopped, and the wound I had in me started healing. Hearing him apologize for all he had put me through was something I had always wanted, and I finally got it. I should have put everything behind us and started out as brother-in-law and sister-in-law, but no, I didn't. After Dan apologized, he went on to say he regretted everything. He regretted hurting me, and ever since that moment, he had been wishing he never made such choices in the past. He said he was too blind then to see what I really meant to him, and only realized the truth after he and Rhea separated. I felt a strange satisfaction hearing him say all that, and I think I lost my mind as well. Dan said I had always been his destiny from the beginning, and I was the reason he had returned back to the country. He came back for me to find me and start our relationship over again, to earn my forgiveness and give our love story another chance. He went as far as saying fate must have seen his intent and had just brought me to him in the easiest way possible. How was that any easier? I was married to his brother, and that was actually very complicated. Dan never took it that way and told me that we could always work as long as our feelings for each other were real. He washed my stupid brain more by telling me to only think about the two of us and follow my heart. My stupid heart started thumping at Dan's words, and I guess that was when I reopened the chapter I thought I had long buried, and as karma would have it, I had unknowingly opened the doors to hell as well. I went back home that evening, and I couldn't stop blushing each time Dan's words rang in my mind. My husband came home, and just like what Dan mentioned earlier, I could indeed see the resemblance between the both of them. Why had I not thought of that before? Could that be one of the reasons I easily fell for Fred? My husband asked about Dan's morning visit, given the fact that he heard about it, and I waved it off, saying he only came to say hi. My naive husband believed me, and he told me he was so glad to have his brother back after years because they were very close. So he asked me to invite Dan over for dinner the next day. My heart bled with unseen joy the moment I heard my husband say that. The thought of seeing Dan again made me feel so happy, and I feel even more guilty for feeling that way for another man, even in my husband's presence. The next day after my husband left for work, I was preparing my son's lunch when I received a call on my phone. I immediately recognized the voice as the same voice that had been echoing in my mind all through the night and the morning. Dan called to inform me he had just received a call from my husband inviting him for dinner later. He sounded so happy, adding that he couldn't wait to see me, as he missed me so much. I can't believe how hard I blushed hearing that, and I feel disgusted with myself now each time I recall everything I did. As if I was controlled, I lost my pride and invited Dan over to the house, telling him he could come over and spend time with me until dinner. I had not even finished talking when the doorbell rang, and there was Dan already outside. I hugged him passionately and welcomed him inside. I gave him a tour around the house, and while we were at it, I can't even explain how disgustingly intimate we were. He would always kiss me at any little chance he had, and instead of acting like the wife I was giggling like a character from a comic book. I'm so ashamed of myself. I can't believe how easy it was for me to forget about my vows. My husband sent me money later, asking me to go grocery shopping for dinner, and he had already informed Dan about it. Seeing my husband's message, I felt guilty for what I was doing, but that feeling immediately vanished the minute Dan hugged me from behind. I told him I needed to go shopping for dinner, and he was very happy about the plan. And just like that, a simple grocery shopping trip transformed into a date. Spending time with Dan that day made me realize just how much I missed going out on dates and having fun. With Fred, it was different. He didn't have time for sweet talks and playing the lover boy, but he was caring, and any little affection he showed was special. He would always make time for family, no matter how little it was, and he always made sure to celebrate Valentine's, birthdays, our anniversaries, and other special days with me, no matter where he was or how hectic his day was. But my sinful outing with Dan filled my head with what I thought was true happiness, and just like that, I had slowly lost myself. We went shopping, then stopped at a restaurant to have lunch together before we took a stroll around the park. We tried to manage our time well because we didn't know when, again, we would be able to hang out like that. Dan said he wanted us to create memories to fill up for the years we weren't together. We went back after we had explored the day to our satisfaction, and I had prepared dinner for the evening. My husband returned, and I immediately switched roles to playing the conservative and sweet wife I had always been. My husband was so happy to see Dan, and they were chatting over dinner the whole time. Though Dan was engaging and chatting with my husband, I could see his eyes sneaking to me almost often, and mine was always ready to accept the sweet yet brief stare. I had gone to the wine room to grab another bottle of wine for Dan and my husband, and was surprised to see Dan behind me. He told me he had lied to Fred that he was going to use the restroom as he couldn't hold it in anymore, and wanted to touch me and kiss me. I told him we needed to be careful and that my husband was home, but he waved it off, assuring me there was nothing to worry about and that Fred trusted us. He was right. He trusted us way too much. I guess that's how it should be between couples, and I was clearly exploiting that bond. We kissed and smooched ourselves to our heart's content before I returned first to the dining table, and Dan joined later. When we were done with dinner, Fred offered Dan the guest room to sleep, saying it was too late for him to go home so he could spend the night. Dan immediately agreed, and after our time together, we finally dispersed to our different rooms. I felt this giggling feeling inside me all night at the thought that Dan was just sleeping downstairs, and it took all my self-control to stop myself from going downstairs to check up on him. My husband tried to make love to me that night, but I had refused. I don't know why, but I didn't feel his touch anymore, and I didn't want Dan to feel bad about it. I talked my husband out of it, claiming I was tired and I needed to sleep. He didn't get mad or stressed about it a bit and just cuddled me to sleep that night. The next day, my husband got a call from his company's head office. There was an emergency, and he had to leave town immediately to sort things out. Dan didn't go home anymore, and he decided to stay until my husband was going to return. Once my son was off to school, Dan and I would turn the whole house upside down. We would get intimate at every corner of the house in different styles and however we wanted it. I was gone, far too gone. I completely forgot about my husband, and everything seemed right to me. Dan took me out shopping, and he bought me a lot of things. Amongst them were new revealing dresses with sultry cuts. I had rejected it, saying my husband would never allow me to wear them, but he insisted, saying I should only wear them on days I wanted to send a message that I missed him or loved him. Everything felt so right and romantic at that moment that I received the gifts with a big blush, unaware that I had just received a package of doom. Each time my husband wasn't around and Dan and I went out on dates, I would wear the dress he got me, enjoying our freedom and exploring our moments. I was no longer afraid of anything, and neither did I ever stop to think about my husband's feelings or that of my child. I had completely replaced my husband Fred with his brother, my first love Dan. Just like how nothing ever stays hidden forever, I had exceeded my limit and had lost all the chances to rewrite my mistakes and get myself back into what was real in my life, which was my marriage. Fred had suddenly returned from his business trip. He actually got back 3 days earlier than the planned day. He had arranged for a family dinner, and this time he suggested hosting it in our house. He said he had an announcement to make. His family and my family were invited, and Dan had texted me that he missed me and he needed my reply. I decided to reply to him by dressing up in one of the dresses he got me. I picked out the sexiest of all, the particular one I had been saving. This one was meant to show him how extremely I had missed him, so I wore it without a second thought because I was consumed with Dan. I decided to make a grand entrance for him and waited until our family and everyone were seated, then I came down. Everyone looked at me stunned as they had never seen me dressed that way, and I could see the smile of satisfaction on Dan's face. That was just all I needed. My mother-in-law made a comment saying that we were young love, and she knew I wanted to surprise my husband and that after all this time, one would think we've settled down a bit, but here we were still acting like newlyweds. And that she supposed it's sweet, but I shouldn't just let it get to my husband's head too much. I smiled, responding to my mother-in-law that she was always able to read my intentions and get the message even quicker than my husband. I had barely settled down after the response when my husband started laughing hysterically. Fred laughed so loudly like a madman that the whole family, including me, was thrown into confusion. No one knew if to laugh along with him or just keep still, as we couldn't tell what made him laugh so much. Not until he let out the words that woke me from the spell of infidelity. He said, "You must have really thought I was an idiot and that I would never see your intentions." My heart stopped beating, and my biggest fears came to reality. Fred got to his feet in rage, slamming a big brown envelope on the table. My mother, noticing his expression, cautiously asked him what the problem was. Dan, who also tried to understand Fred, picked up the envelope, taking out its contents, and boom, pictures of my sinful moment with Dan were staring right at everyone. Dan was so stunned and caught off guard that he tried to hide the pictures, thereby spilling them over the whole dining table in the rush. My family was shocked and speechless, while my husband's family stared at me with the highest level of disgust in their eyes. Fred said he had always tried to ignore all the signs he saw, convincing himself he was only overthinking a bit, and his brother and wife would never do that to him. It was not until his son had unknowingly told him about Dan's frequent holidays at his home each time he was not around. He had decided to get the real story out of everything, so he had hired a private investigator to watch my every move, and that was how he found out about everything, and that even until the last moment, I still had to disappoint him and rub my dirt in his face. He stormed upstairs, returning with all the dresses Dan got me, and told me that he knew what they all signified, and even the one I was putting on at the moment was all meant to please his ex-brother. He said he didn't care if a word like that existed, but all that mattered was that from that moment on, he and Dan were no longer brothers, and that I should get out of his house. He told me to only take the stuff Dan got me, and I should never take even a needle that he got for me. I dropped to my knees to beg, but Fred stormed upstairs before I could even open my mouth. I turned to beg my family for help, only to realize that my family had already disappeared from the dining table, and it was only Fred's family that sat fazed and shocked. Dan left the house, and just like that, everyone began to leave one after the other, leaving just me on my knees, sobbing and sweating. Then I heard Fred's footsteps. I crawled over, ready to beg him, only for me to see a rageful demon charging towards me. Fear gripped me that even my leg responded on its own, and I ran out of the house for my life. My slutty clothes followed in the air right behind me, and the doors shut me out without letting me make even a sound. I felt so lost and helpless. I had nothing on me except the half-naked dresses that lay around me, reminding me of my stupidity. Update. I thought I had seen the worst of life when Dan hurt me in the past, but I was wrong. The price of hurting someone who loved you hurt 1,000,000 times more than when I got hurt by someone. I know how it feels as I had experienced it before, but I still don't know how I was able to do the same to someone else. I hurt my husband. I hurt my son and myself as well, all for a fleeting experience I called love. It's been almost a month since Fred threw me out of his house and his life. I had done everything to get back with him, but the more I tried, the more I was drained. I tried reaching out to my family for help, but they had all blocked me and refused to acknowledge me as their child. My dad even said he never had a child, and my mom said she lost hers a month ago. I'm left all alone. So even the man who claimed he had returned just to find me and be with me again left the country again after burning down my world. His family curses and blames me for ruining their family and breaking the relationship and bond it took them years to build. Finally, I knew there was no hope for me anymore when Fred sent me divorce papers, and he also claimed full custody of our child. I almost lost my mind. He was not only cutting me out of his life, but our son's life as well. I tried to fight back, claiming I was the child's mother, and I would never agree to it. All my attempts were useless because Fred exposed my infidelity to the court with evidence. That was the last blow. Now I have no one and nothing left in my life. I don't even know where to begin. My eyes are so dark with no hope left to see.